Hello and welcome. I'm Suma Katauka and you're watching News World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has called for a drone wall to protect Europe's eastern flank, but the plan faces political and technical hurdles. Meanwhile, Germany and France have expressed skepticism, though EU officials seek to expand the project and tap Ukraine's war experience to boost its defense capabilities. US President Donald Trump has warned that Hamas would be disarmed quickly and perhaps violently if they resist. Following the recent Gaza peace deal, Trump did not provide further details on how the disarmament would occur or the methods used by US. Israel has confirmed the transfer of four more bodies of deceased captives from Gaza, which were handed over to the International Red Cross and are now with the respective families. The Israeli government previously stated that it would limit aid trucks entering Gaza to 300 per day due to the slow pace of body transfers. The United States and China have begun imposing port fees on each other's vessels, escalating their trade war. This comes as China exempted Chinese-built ships from its levies and sanctioned a South Korean shipbuilder, while President Donald Trump moved to reduce China's dominance in maritime trade and boost U.S. shipbuilding instead. China, the European Union, and several IMO members have reaffirmed support for the net zero framework to cut global shipping emissions. Despite US threats, the framework, expected to be formally adopted on Friday in London, would impose carbon deductions on ships starting in 2028 or face financial penalties. Madagascar's military has seized power after President Andry Rajoelina was impeached and fled the country following weeks of Gen Z-led protests and army defections, according to media reports. The mutiny, led by an army commander, came after Rajoelina defied calls to step down. Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara is set to visit Russia to meet President Vladimir Putin, marking his first official trip to Moscow. The visit aims to strengthen the legitimacy of Syria's transitional government following the ousting of the Bashar al-Assad regime in December. WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus has said a World Health Organization team came under attack while escorting a UN convoy in Ukraine. 2 World Food Program trucks were damaged in the incident near Bilozerka, as the chief urged to end the attacks. Now we have a breaking news. The Israeli military has said that one of the bodies handed over by Hamas as part of an exchange for Palestinian prisoners was not a formal hostage. After overnight forensic tests on 4 bodies, which was returned on Tuesday, the army has said that medical officials concluded that one body does not match any of the hostages. The Israeli military has warned that Hamas is required to make all necessary efforts to return the deceased hostages. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mohammed Osman. He's an international relations specialist, joins us from Cairo. Thank you, Osman, for joining us again. Always pleasure talking to you. Now, with one of the bodies handed over by Hamas not matching this identity of any known hostage, how do you foresee this development affecting ongoing peace efforts, phase 1? And here I can only assume, but do you think that the bodies of hostages may have been lost or destroyed during this conflict, given the intensity of the situation?
Thank you for having me, Asuma. Always a pleasure to be with you as well. Well, unfortunately, this agreement that has been promulgated with regards to Gaza and Sharm el-Sheikh, or the Trump peace plan, it will inevitably run into certain complications, and certain challenges will arise along the way that might complicate things. However, if there is a genuine will to to implement it, especially on the part of the Americans, it will be implemented. And of course, one of those challenges is the challenges of the bodies or the corpses of the hostages and the detainees, 28 of those. Hamas turned in 4 of them at the beginning of the ceasefire with the detainee exchange a couple of days ago. Yesterday, they submitted 2 other or turned over to the Red Cross and the Israelis afterwards 4 other corpses. And now it seems that one of those corpses is not of an Israeli hostage. And we have to bear in mind, Asuma, that finding these bodies is a very hard task because most of them are under the rubble. And why are they under the rubble? Because they were killed by Israel's indiscriminate bombing of the Gaza Strip, meaning that Israel, because it activated the Hannibal Doctrine, paid no attention to the lives of its own hostages and captives inside the Gaza Strip and caused the death of dozens of them, unfortunately, of course, and many of them are civilians, and this is truly unfortunate. The Red Cross said yesterday that it will be very hard to retrieve all the bodies in a timely manner, and some of the bodies might not even be retrieved due to the circumstances of the aftermath of this brutal conflict. And Israel took advantage of what happened yesterday, the delay in the turnover of the 4 corpses, in order to stifle the entry of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. And they even violated the ceasefire by carrying out airstrikes, killing 9 Palestinian civilians yesterday. And afterwards, the bodies were turned over yesterday because thanks to Egyptian and American mediation, which was very fast in order to resolve this impasse. Now, with the Israelis saying that one of the bodies does not belong or is not actually of the Israeli hostage that it was supposed to belong to, then of course I think Israel will use that to further place more obstacles and further obstruct the implementation of the agreement. And by the way, the exchange of the corpses is part of phase 1 of the agreement, and phase 1 now is about to end. And phase 2, according to President Trump, has already started. Here in Egypt and Sharm el-Sheikh, the negotiating teams of Hamas, Israel, Egypt, the United States, Turkey, and Qatar are all here discussing the implementation of phase 2 concerning the post-war governance and the disarmament of Hamas and the further withdrawal of the Israeli military. So it will be a very, very hard journey ahead. We will witness a lot of obstacles along the way, a lot of hurdles, and maybe Israel will violate the ceasefire every now and then and use violent tactics in order to pressure the Palestinians. However, as long as the Americans are committed to the implementation and the success of the peace plan, I think it will succeed eventually, Asuma. And for once, I am optimistic, or cautiously optimistic, that is.
Yes, thank you, Mohammed, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you, and now we stay in the region. In Gaza City, residents face severe hardships days after the ceasefire deal. They report no work, no food, no water, and no shelter. Many homes lie in ruins. Families struggle to find safe places to stay. One woman said that she has 36 children and grandchildren with nowhere to go. Water and electricity remain scarce. Cold weather worsens their plight. Despite promises, many fear forced displacement. As winter approaches, Palestinians in Gaza call for urgent aid and shelter to survive the harsh conditions. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza continues with hope and help still desperately needed. Let's have a look at what some displaced Palestinians have said.
لا في شغل، لا في أكل، لا في شرب، لا في سكن، وبعدين جاي الشتاء. والله العظيم أقول لك قسما بالله ما عندنا الأحرامات، ما عندي وهد، ما عندي ما عنديش حاجة أنا ولا شيء. طلعت دار اتدمرت وضلتني يعني فيش شيء، وهلقيت بنعاني. وين بدنا نسكن؟ وين بدنا نروح؟ إيش بدنا نسوي؟ وإحنا هنا بيجي 36 نفر عندي أنا وأحفادي وكناين وأولادي، مش عارفين وين بدنا نروح وبدنا نيجي.
الوضع تعبان ووضعنا مأساوي للغاية، ورحنا على دورنا في حي التفاح، لقينا الدور وفيش دور ولا لنا ماء ولا لنا حاجة. بنصحى الصبح دور لك على شربة ماء نشربها، بدك ناكل طبعا فيش مصاري وفيش حياة نشتغل فيها، مش حياة هذه. وهي اليوم برضه بقول لك انسحابات ما انسحبوش، عم كله كذب. احنا بنروح بطخوا علينا، بدنا نجيب اغراض شويه اغراض لهالشتاء، الجو برد علينا جاي، ما فيش ولا ان اي حاجه ولا ان اي عنيله، يعني احنا ما لناش الا الله.
ولا مي ولا كهرباء ولا اي شيء ولا ملتزمات الحياه كلها. يعني انا هنا مروح على دار نازله، مش عارف وين اقعد، مش عارف انا بالضبط انا وين اقعد، طالع على التوكيل يعني تسهيل ربنا.
Now we go back to our guest discussion with Mohammed Osman. He's an international relations specialist, joins us live from Cairo. Thank you very much, Mohammed, for staying with us. Now, the international community has been divided over how to handle Hamas about this conflict. Do you believe the group should be treated primarily as a political entity, or do you think they should be treated as a militant group?
Of course, this is a very thorny question, Asuma.
Yeah.
However, I think that Hamas, at least, even if they want to be a political actor at this point, the international consensus is that they should turn over their weapons and disarm. And I think that this disarmament process should not be demeaning to Hamas. The arms should be turned over to a trusted Arab counterpart or the Palestinian Authority, and not the Israelis, of course. And Hamas is part of the reality of the political spectrum of Palestine and the Palestinian political class in general. They do have, I'm not a big fan of Hamas or any Islamist organization, but they are a part of the on-the-ground reality, and they have a certain following among the Palestinian people. They do represent a certain segment of the Palestinian people, and they have a large constituency. So the idea of completely excluding Hamas from the political process in Palestine, I don't think is feasible or realistic. However, I do understand that there are certain security guarantees that have to be provided for Israel, including the disarmament of Hamas, at least their offensive weapons, and that Hamas should not rule the Gaza Strip as well. And I think that these conditions have been partially, at least, accepted by Hamas. Hamas has agreed not to govern the Gaza Strip anymore and to turn over the Gaza Strip to a transitional committee, which will be tied to the Palestinian Authority. And I think that we are moving forward with this, and the Americans are open to the idea, even though the US plan has provided for imposing some sort of international trusteeship over Gaza in the form of this board of peace. However, it seems that the Palestinians have reservations on this proposition. So do the Arab stakeholders, including Egypt. So I think it will be revisited. Maybe this international body or board of peace will be an advisory board that will monitor the implementation of the ceasefire rather than being the effective government of Gaza. So these are all questions that will be answered in the second phase of the negotiations, and Hamas needs to readjust to these realities. They need to be serious about disarmament and serious about reforming their agenda and openly and accepting the peace process and the two-state solution. I think this will be a good step forward in order to end the demonization of Hamas and effectively integrate them into the Palestinian political process without any fears being emitted to the Israelis that will cause them concern, the Israelis and the Americans. So I think this is very important, because if Hamas does not do that, Israel will use that as a justification, not only to stop the implementation of the deal, but also to relaunch the war against Gaza. We've all heard what President Trump said yesterday. He threatened Hamas that he said that they told him they will disarm, and he said if they do not disarm, he will disarm them swiftly and violently. Of course, this kind of narrative and rhetoric by President Trump does not help. However, it does reflect a certain reality. Hamas refusing to disarm will cause a continuation of the war. And I think that Hamas will act responsibly in this regards, assuming.
Right, thank you for sharing that. And also, with the US supporting Israel and some Arab nations maintaining diplomatic ties with Israel, do you see any possibility of a shift in Middle East alliances, especially with the summit that just was held 2 days ago?
I wouldn't say shift of alliances, because no Arab country would align itself with Israel at this point. Israel has alienated everyone. The carnage and the devastation they have undertaken and inflicted upon the civilian population of the Palestinian Gaza Strip is unimaginable. They have alienated themselves among the Arab nations, and the Arab nations do not see any benefit at this point of maintaining any strategic partnership or cooperation with the Israeli side. Even Saudi Arabia, who was on its way or on the verge of normalizing relations with Israel and restoring or establishing diplomatic ties, this, of course, this train was completely sidetracked at the moment, or even derailed entirely because of what happened in Gaza. No Arab government in their right mind at this point would deepen their relationship with Israel. And even a country like Egypt. Egypt has had diplomatic relations with Israel since 1979, since the signing of the peace treaty over 40 years ago, maybe even 50. I'm very bad with my arithmetic, so you'll have to forgive me. Even though they have maintained a cold peace for this long, the relationship never went beyond a cold peace, as many political scientists like to call it, because Israel has always, with its actions, alienated Arab players and partners, including the Egyptian part. And when the Gaza war happened, the relationship deteriorated to its lowest point since the signing of the peace treaty. And actually, Egypt and Israel were on the verge of potential conflict due to Israel's behavior in Gaza and their attempts to displace the Palestinians, forcefully displace the Palestinians into Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. So as you can see, Asuma, they have alienated the Arab world. So I do not think that there will be any significant shifts in alliances in the Middle East at this point with regards to Israel, of course.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Mohammed. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next news as well. Now we move on to Europe. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has praised the leadership of U.S. President Donald Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, saying the Western alliance has become more lethal under their guidance. Rutte has made the remarks today as NATO defense ministers gathered in Brussels to discuss ongoing support for Ukraine amid the ongoing conflict. He credited the strengthening military readiness and strategic direction provided by the U.S.'s leadership for enhancing NATO's ability to respond effectively to global security threats. The comments highlights the deepening cooperation within the alliance as member nations continue to coordinate efforts to support Ukraine and deter aggression. Let's listen into what Mark Rutte has said.
I particularly want to thank President Trump and you personally for your leadership and the whole team for the fact that NATO is now much stronger, more lethal.
Now for this discussion, we're joined by Mohammed Osman. He's an international relations specialist, joins us live from Cairo. Thank you very much, Mohammed, for staying with us. Now, we have seen different opinions from all our guests, that Europe is moving too slow, Europe is not doing enough. What's your analysis also now that Europe is evolving from peace project without arms to one that includes more arms for defense? What are the key challenges and opportunities for Europe as it strengthens its defense capabilities, according to you?
Of course, it's logical that Europe would move towards further militarization and upping their defense spending over the past 3+ years and in the foreseeable future due to the war in Ukraine, because they feel threatened by potential Russian expansion. Maybe this is logical, but the idea of trying to inflate or intensify the inflammatory rhetoric against Russia and putting Europe on a war footing with Russia, I don't think that's the way to go. Now, the European leaders and European officials and NATO officials like Mark Rutte here are making very silly comments and very silly claims that Russia is preparing to attack NATO. Mark Rutte said that the other day, that Russia is preparing to attack NATO. Russia cannot even get done with their own war in Ukraine. Yes, they are advancing on the ground, but they did not achieve a decisive victory, even though they have been fighting for over 3 years. Right now. So I think that the fear mongering that NATO is carrying out is because they need to mobilize the European populace and the European public opinion behind them once more in order to settle for more military spending, more escalation with Russia, and more support for Ukraine. It seems that the Europeans are not interested in ending the war in Ukraine at this point. They still believe that maybe Russia will be defeated one way or the other, even though over the past 3 years, Russia has demonstrated that it cannot be defeated. The country has vast resources. It has the second largest and strongest military in the world, and it has the world's largest nuclear arsenal. So it's either it will win in Ukraine or we will have a third world war. And the Europeans fail to understand that so far, but the Americans do. President Trump has reckoned that continuing this escalatory scheme with Russia will have devastating consequences. Therefore, he is trying to mediate a peace. Of course, now he's pressuring the Russians because the Russians are not being reasonable enough, according to the Americans. They are being very stringent in their negotiating position. They refuse to give any concessions and are only interested in dictating their own conditions for a settlement. So the Americans might be trying to pressure the Russians by threatening with sanctions and maybe even by hinting that they might provide Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles. Even though this will be a very dangerous escalation, I do not believe that it will have any detrimental effect on Russia's battlefield capabilities. Russia has, according to many military experts and observers, maintains the military initiative, the battlefield initiative in Ukraine. They are steadily advancing in the Donbass, in Kharkiv, and in Zaporozhye. It doesn't seem that the Ukrainians are able to turn the tide at this point, despite all the Western armaments they have received. They have received F-16s, HIMARS missile artillery. They have received multiple artillery systems. They have received many cruise missiles from Germany and France and Britain, Storm Shadow and others, and yet they did not regain the strategic initiative, and Russia controls over 20% of Ukraine and is still advancing. And of course, Russia's military production infrastructure far exceeds that of Europe. So Europe is not even being realistic when they try to compete with Russia in terms of military production, for example. So I believe it's a non-starter to begin with, and it's either that this war of attrition will go on for a few more months or even a few more years until a settlement is reached when all parties agree that a decisive military solution is not possible, or this war will continue on this escalatory track, which will lead to a potential conflict between NATO and Russia, which neither Russia nor NATO actually wants. So NATO is playing a very, very dangerous game, and I hope they know what they're doing.
Always great learning from you, Osman. Thank you very much for that insightful expertise and sharing that.